president's position, the Democrats' position of not negotiating is not sustainable.
There's no reason for us to have the drama that we have right now.
The Supreme Court should step up and fix this themselves.
I look forward to having that debate about why we think that President Biden needs to get another 4 years.
A vote for President Biden is a vote for President Harris.
From CBS News in Washington, I'm Ed O'Keefe. Welcome once again to America Decides. There are just 553 days until America decides who it wants to serve as its next president, 251 days until Iowa Republicans get to decide who they want as the GOP's presidential nominee. And according to the Treasury Secretary, there are just 30 days until the White House and Congress need to decide how to raise the federal debt limit, or, as she says, the U.S. government will be unable to continue to satisfy all of the government's obligations. In plain English, the feds won't be able to pay their bills. And that's where we begin tonight on America Decides, as President Biden has now invited the top 4 congressional leaders to the White House a week from today to discuss how to sort out this mess. A White House official tells CBS News Mr. Biden will stress that Congress must take action to avoid default without conditions in the meeting, while House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has called on the president to engage in talks over the issue, which it looks like they're now set to do. So let's check in with both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. Weijia Jiang is CBS News senior White House correspondent. Nicole Killian is CBS News congressional correspondent. But we'll begin with Weijia, where today, again, there were questions at the White House about what exactly the president is hoping to accomplish in this meeting a week from today and why he's waiting a week. What is the latest there as they watch the clock tick down?
Well, the White House says that the president wants to once again stress how urgent and dire this situation is, because now we have this timeline that is even earlier than what was initially expected for the U.S. to run out of money to pay its bills. And so today, the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was asked several times about sort of the thinking behind why the president decided to finally pick up the phone, because there was a stalemate, as you well know, Ed, for so many weeks, months, I should say, between him and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. And we keep saying it around here that it is a game of chicken and somebody has to blink first. It appears that the president, at least with regard to communicating, blinked first, because he did invite McCarthy here, along with the 3 other congressional leaders, to have this conversation. But they are stressing, Ed, and they say this over and over, that the president refuses to negotiate when it comes to the debt ceiling, that he wants to have 2 totally separate conversations about, 1, raising the debt ceiling or suspending it, or 2, a discussion about the budget, which, of course, is what Republicans want. But McCarthy has made clear, and he hasn't changed his position at all, that he's not willing to raise that ceiling, to have that conversation until they talk about the debt and about spending specifically. So, frankly, even though they have a date on the books, which is May 9th, next week, nothing has changed with regard of their positions. There hasn't been any blinking in terms of the substance, just blinking in terms of whether they will meet or not.
To be continued, and we'll talk to Nicole about that in a moment. I know the other thing that coming from the White House today is plans to send about 1,500 U.S. troops down to the U.S.-Mexico border. What will they be doing? And I know you also were pushing them on what else is the White House planning to do regarding immigration reform as pandemic-era restrictions on the border are set to lapse next week.
Right. So that policy, that restriction, was a CDC policy called Title 42, which expires next week. And officials are expecting a surge of migrants at the border as a result of that, because before, U.S. officials down there could just turn away migrants, essentially citing this pandemic-era policy, which will no longer be the case. And so they are sending 1,500 active duty troops down there, but doing what is described as an administrative role. So the White House is very clear that they are not going to be the ones enforcing the law. They are simply clearing the way, doing the administrative work, doing the monitoring and data entering, so that CBP officials can actually do the law enforcement piece of this. But Republicans are saying it's not enough. That's not the solution. And they need to find a better way to turn migrants away when they find out that they are not actually able to qualify for asylum. Ed?
All of this seems to set up, Weijia, the idea that this week is one week, but next week's set to be a bigger week because there's a lot of big decisions and moves that are going to get made next week. And, of course, You and Nancy and I and all the others will be tracking it there from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Thank you as always. Now let's bring in Nicole Killion, who of course is CBS News congressional correspondent, as we ask you about what's going on regarding the debt limit. I want to begin with something that the Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said earlier today, and we'll talk about how that sort of sets the pace for the week ahead.
There is no solution in the Senate. We have divided government. The American people gave the Republicans the House. The Democrats have the presidency. The president and the speaker need to reach an agreement to get us past this impasse.
So in essence, Nicole, what he's saying there is, yeah, the president and I may have cut some deals back in the day, but given the way the math's done now, I'm not the guy to call to get that deal, right?
Well, precisely. And he has been deferential to the speaker for some time now and said today and reaffirmed that he thinks that what the speaker and House Republicans put on the table is something that is reasonable and, in his view, worthy of consideration. But to his point, that deal needs to be struck between that group of Republicans and the president, simply because that is what they have put forth as a proposal. Democrats, though, are preparing workarounds. We know that Leader Schumer, for instance, has set a process in motion where not only could they consider a clean debt limit increase, but also the House Republican bill. House Democrats today also moved forward in a similar vein. Obviously, they already passed the Republican debt limit bill, but we did learn today that House Democrats intend to try to attach a clean debt ceiling increase to an unrelated bill, just so they have that as an option if these negotiations don't work out.
Got it. So some break glass options are now being put in place just in case something isn't cut in the next 30 days. The House is out this week. The Senate is in. And today, the Judiciary Committee held a hearing, a long-anticipated one, on the debate over whether or not the Supreme Court needs to be subject to stricter ethics rules. Let's take a listen to some of the highlights.
The Supreme Court should step up and fix this themselves. For years, they've refused. And because the court will not act, Congress must.
From our point of view, on this side of the aisle, we're going to push back as hard as we can and tell the American people the truth about what's going on here. This is not about making the court better. This is about destroying a conservative court.
All right, well, that lays out sort of the two arguments on either side. But, Nicole, what is the likelihood that Congress ever takes up legislation to, in essence, enact a stricter code of ethics for the Big Nine that work across the street of the Supreme Court?
Well, it seems highly unlikely at this point, especially if you watch this hearing, because it really was a lot of finger pointing and going back and forth. I mean, look, Democrats argue that there should be some enforceable code of conduct when it comes to ethics by these justices at the Supreme Court. Republicans continue to contend that, in their view, this isn't warranted, that today's hearing was simply more of a partisan exercise to try to pick on justices like Clarence Thomas in light of some of these reports about his relationship with a GOP mega donor. So right now, it's hard to see where they find any common ground.
All right. Well, if anything, it was a chance for Democrats to air their grievances and Republicans to push back, and such is politics these days. We'll see if they ever get around to it. Nicole Killion on Capitol Hill, thank you so much for your time. We'll talk to you as the week progresses. According to our CBS News poll, only 55% of Democrats say they want President Biden to run again. I'll speak to a rising star in the party about how Mr. Biden could overcome that enthusiasm gap. Stay tuned for that next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Maryland's new governor, Wes Moore, has been on the job for only about 100 days. And he's already being talked about as a potential presidential candidate. And speaking of Democratic primaries, there could be a crowded one in his own home state after longtime Maryland Senator Ben Cardin announced Monday he'll not be seeking re-election and will be retiring after his term is over. Earlier, I spoke to Governor Moore about that open seat. Maryland Governor Wes Moore, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you here in person.
Great to see you.
No, you didn't have to go as far as some governors do to get to Washington, but it's good to see you regardless. You are here with us the day after your state's senior senator, Ben Cardin, announced that he's going to be retiring at the end of this year, won't be seeking re-election. Yeah. It immediately sparked what's going to be a pretty darn crowded primary, potentially, among like-minded Democrats, but who haven't had an opportunity like this since earlier this century, at least, since it was last open Senate seat. Let's tick through a few questions related to this. I think I know the answer to this one. I'm going to ask it anyway. Are you interested in running for the Senate?
Not at all.
Okay.
I remember someone said, when did you decide you wanted to run for politics, get into politics? And I said I didn't. I wanted to be governor.
Okay.
So I love my job, and I'm excited to keep doing it.
Executive, not legislative. Get it. You have a preferred contender, though, or potential successor.
No, I think this is going to be a very spirited race, and there are a lot of people who are actively looking at it. I think right now we're going to see who actually gets into the race. We'll see what kind of campaigns people are pulling together. The thing that I know, and as the governor and the titular leader of the party, we know that we need to have an organized and a substance-based race. Who is going to be the successor for Senator Cardin, and I'm excited about being able to support our nominee as they go into next fall.
Will you tolerate a crowded primary, or should there be some conversation among the potential successors about not letting it get too sprawling, too expensive, frankly, at a time when Democrats need all the money they can in a lot of other places to make sure they can hold on to seats?
Yeah, I mean, I believe in the democratic process. I believe that if a person believes that they are the right person to be able to help lead the state as part of the federal delegation, then people should explore it and people should run. I also know that I believe that we have to make sure that this is organized. We have to make sure that this is above board. And the thing that I will not be okay with nor tolerate is if people are getting into the race and their behavior or the race that they're running becomes destructive.
Any thoughts on whether your predecessor, Larry Hogan, should consider a run? I mean, that is probably the most formidable Republican, at least statewide these days, were he to get in.
Well, I don't think he'd take my political advice even if I offered it. But I think whoever the Republicans decide to put up and whatever Republican decides to get in the race, they should do it. The thing that I know is that we're going to be ready to defend our values. We're going to be ready to defend our principles. We're going to be ready to continue to show Marylanders why having Democratic leadership has been good for the state of Maryland, why we've been able to get big things done together, why we've been able to get big things done with the current administration, with the Biden administration. And I think Marylanders are going to see that level of continuity and that level of cohesion is good for the people of Maryland.
And I've been struck, looking at numbers we've done in terms of CBS News polling, when it comes to Democrats and the re-election of President Biden, that only 55% of Democrats say they want him to run again. 45% don't. I mean, that's almost an even split. A win's a win, but 55-45 suggests it's really close. When we ask those Democrats, the 45% who don't want him to run, why they don't think he should, 86% say it's because of his age, 77% say it's because they want someone new to run. I imagine, I know you're hearing from Democrats who say they want something new, someone younger, someone with fresh ideas and fresh perspective. How do you get Democrats motivated knowing that he's probably going to be the standard bearer, but the enthusiasm for him isn't necessarily there?
I just remind people why I'm excited to be able to go out there and campaign for him. Just since I've been the governor of Maryland, the president has come to Maryland multiple times. The first time he came to the state, it was to announce a partnership that we were going to be working on for the Frederick Douglass Tunnel, which is going to produce over 30,000 jobs in the state of Maryland, 20,000 of them being construction union jobs. And we have a real partner in the federal government that is helping to make that happen. When we put together really bold goals and targets for offshore wind and for clean energy, I know that the reason that we are going to be able to get to 100% clean energy by 2035 is because we've got a partner inside of Washington that's helping to make it so. And so what I'm excited to share with people is why I know that that I want 4 more years of the kind of partnership that I have right now, because that's going to produce the best results for the people of Maryland.
You just were elected governor. We've talked about this. You've just been in for a little more than 100 days. What do you make of all this chatter that you should already be thinking about running for president?
I don't. I mean, look, for the past 100 days, we've just had one of the most successful and productive legislative sessions, not of any first-year governor in the state of Maryland, but of any governor in the state of Maryland, full stop. That we've been able to address, real obstacles, like how do you make our state more competitive but also make it more equitable, about how do you focus on public safety and making sure that local law enforcement has what they need, about putting together record investments in public education and creating a service share option. So frankly, I don't, because I'm really focused on making sure that we can be a state that is going to move fast, and this is going to be Maryland's decade. And in partnership, we're going to make it happen.
Okay, so you're taking the keep my head down, do the job, and if people want to talk to me about this again in 4 or 5 years, we can have that conversation approach, which others have taken before too. Yeah. But, there's you, there's Governor Shapiro, just to your north up in Pennsylvania. There's the vice president, should she want to run in 4 years. Is it fair to put people like you on the bench and say that that's potentially who's in the mix for 2028?
No, I don't consider it the bench, right? I'm in the game right now. I think about what we're doing in the state of Maryland, where we are really helping to set the pace.
You did win by 40 points, in part because you're running against as your party calls them, MAGA extremist, Republican who denied reality about the 2020 election, who was elevated in part by fellow Democrats who went out and fiddled in the Republican primary and boosted your opponent. Yeah. Should the Democratic Party keep doing that in gubernatorial, congressional, or presidential elections next year?
Well, I think what happened in our election was that, the reason that we ended up winning with that kind of margin wasn't just because we mobilized Democratic voters, right? I mean, we won Democrats, we won independents, and we won a good chunk of Republicans as well. And so I think that the thing that is going to happen, and I think the thing that we need to continue showing, is you have to be able to be very clear with voters about who you are, about what you stand for, and about how your vision for, in our case, the state, but for other people who are running elsewhere, that you need to be very clear about why your vision best matches theirs. And the truth is that, if it ends up being, what it potentially could end up being in the presidential election, you are literally having the forefather of the MAGA movement who's going to be running on the Republican side. And I look forward to having that debate with, having that debate about why we think that President Biden needs to get another 4 years.
Yeah. Well, Governor Westmore, you've been good to CBS through the years. Keep it up, please, if you don't mind, while you're governor, and we'll talk again soon.
I absolutely will, and thank you so much.
All righty. Campaigns and potential campaigns are starting to staff up. We have original CBS News reporting about a historic first named as campaign manager. That's next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. For more on the day's political headlines, including one they've just published of their own, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Finn Gomez join us now. Caitlin, of course, is CBS News political correspondent. Finn is CBS News' political director. That means he directs political coverage. Get it? And both of you were up to something today, and it just published a little while ago. Tell us what this is about regarding Tim Scott's presidential campaign.
Yes, Ed. CBS News has learned that Senator Tim Scott, who is widely expected to launch his campaign on May 22nd in South Carolina, will be picking his longtime aide, Jennifer Casper, as his campaign manager for that likely bid. She would become the first woman of color to ever run a Republican presidential campaign, an historic first.
And that's an important distinction, Republican presidential campaign, because we've had a handful on the Democratic side. She's served alongside him for quite a bit, right?
Yeah, she came to his office when he was in the House. She served as his chief of staff in the Senate. And they have a very close relationship. And as you know from talking to her, she also has a really compelling backstory. And that's something that she's really hoping to bring to the campaign. And she also noted that she and Scott, they point to their backstories, their personal stories, as a way to relate to voters in a way that other candidates may not be able to. And that's something I think we're going to see highlighted in this campaign. Tell us a little bit more about her backstory, though, because it is really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. She comes from Colorado, a former prosecutor, a state prosecutor. She went to this University of Michigan, a top 10 law school. But in 2008, her dream was to move to to work to move to D.C. and work on Capitol Hill. It was hard to find a job during that time, of course, as we all remember. The job that she could find was in the back pages of the Washington Post, and it was a ramp agent at Dulles Airport. And she did that for a year. She called it incredibly humbling. She leaned into her Christian faith, and it is something that really sort of expanded her perspective. A lot of the people that she worked with from different countries, and he still keeps in touch with them now.
And I think what's really also interesting to note, just kind of politically more broadly, as you both know, as we've reported on, it is very hard for women to rise up to the top positions in political campaigns, let alone a presidential campaign. And we actually have, or going to have, 3 at least. Obviously, the Biden campaign, you guys broke that news last week. Nikki Haley's campaign, also a woman campaign manager. We saw a lot of women running campaigns in 2020, but this is significant because you do have women of color now in these positions. And we've talked to a lot of strategists over the years who note how difficult it is for women to gain traction in these positions. So some history already being made in this early campaign.
And if you're going to win races going forward, you got to be hiring and working with and taking cues from women, from minorities, because that is the way the electorate's headed.
Absolutely.
Speaking of Nikki Haley, we have noted, we've been talking about this, how she continues to make the advanced age of certain American political figures a bit of an issue as her campaign continues. So much so we wanted to call it out yet again. Take a look at this.
We won't win the fight for the 21st century if we keep trusting politicians from the 20th century.
If you vote for Joe Biden, you really are counting on a President Harris, because the idea that he would make it until 86 years old is not something that I think is likely. The American people deserve transparency to be able to say that, yes, they're at the top of their game. These competency tests are very simple. They're just about naming things that start with the same letter.
Quickly, Caitlin, she is still in the single digits in our CBS News poll. What's the goal here, and is it working?
It's certainly a way to gain some traction, or at least some headlines. And it's, interesting because it applies not only to Biden, but also to Trump, presumably. And that's a place that, not a lot of other Republicans want to go, as we've talked about before. Some other Republicans don't really want to touch this issue because they know there are liabilities for Trump as well. But I do think it's interesting that she is trying to gain traction with it. It'll be interesting to hear from voters. I mean, our own polling last year showed that most voters wanted some kind of age limit for candidates.
Yeah. She seems to be leaning into that for sure. We'll see. But
it's a little risky also. I mean, with some of the electorate, especially some of those early states where there's a larger percentage of older Americans, 55 and older, 75 and older, who go out to the polls.
Especially in Florida.
Especially in Florida and Arizona.
And South Carolina.
Yeah, sure.
We'll see. Caitlin Huey-Burns, Finn Gomez, thank you as always. That does it for today. My colleague Major Garrett will be back with more tomorrow night. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.